I think we're ready to start. Welcome to the Art of Severed talk. It's kind of weird because the game is not out yet, but it will be soon. A couple of years ago, I did a talk about the art of guacamole, and they put the video in the vault, and I watched myself, and apparently I have an accent, which I didn't know about that. So hopefully everyone can understand me properly. Let's get started because there's a bunch of stuff. So I work at Drinkbox Studios as a concept lead. We developed about a blob, mutant blobs attack, and most famously guacamole. And for Severed, we've had been doing platformers for like a long time, and we were kind of saturated a little bit. So let me take you back to the magical time that was 2013, when we were wrapping up guacamole. And all these ideas for new projects started to come up in the studio. Chris Harvey or one of the founders, had an idea of making maybe a touch game, like an iOS or something like that. There was some other ideas, maybe like a cursed warrior or something. And these were all just like ideas, nothing tangible yet. But it kind of got me thinking of doing something very different, just to kind of have a new set of challenges and kind of change it around a little bit. So around that time, I'm also having just different ideas about memories and being away from my family. I distinctly remember a weird moment with my mom where, like, I think we were wrapping up guacamole and like just talking to her on the phone, and I'm just pacing around the room, and she's giving me like some nice advice, and I remembered some other advice that she had given me like 6 months before, but the image of the memory was me pacing around the room having a phone conversation with this disembodied person, which was very interesting because usually when you have memories, nice memories with someone, you have kind of like a place and a smell and maybe what they're wearing and maybe the scenery is different. But all these memories started to be kind of the same, even though in my mind they were different. So kind of thinking about that as kind of like an emotional kind of core for a game. And all of these ideas started to come together. And at one point, it's kind of like it starts to simmer, and then all of a sudden, like, it starts boiling, and you're like, okay, I need to do something now. So I did a concept video, which I'll show you right now. So I would go home after work, and like that week, a couple of days of the week, I'd make this really rough concept pitch for what eventually would become Severed. So I'm going to show you. This doesn't have audio, it's just images. Oh, no. Okay. Is it playing now? Yeah. So I just animated this in Flash very, very roughly. As you can see, it's just basically a square tool over and over. But the idea is to create a mood for what the game could be, kind of packaging all the stuff that some ideas from the studio and some ideas kind of packaged with what I had just been talking about, the memories and all that stuff. So the plot, I wanted to have something very mysterious and not as operatic as guacamole, or not as prototypical. And at that time, I called the game Slash, which I thought it was pretty clever with just like a division symbol, meaning obviously like slashing around, but also like the divide that this character is going through. And now here is like some example of what the navigation, how I envision navigation being. And this is kind of borrowed from an old game called Shining in the Darkness. It's a precursor for Shining Force. It's like an obscure Genesis game. But basically you're in the middle of the town, and you act as kind of like the axis around it. So you can choose to go, say, to the tavern to recruit people, or to the shop, or whatever. In this case, this is like a transition. You're inside, and you're like maybe buy something. Just the idea was that you can make like a 2D game, or make 2D art presented in a way that you can have a spatial relationship that feels more three-dimensional, kind of like those old school dungeon crawlers or something like that. So I wanted to make something simple, something kind of like a palette cleanser from doing all these platformers, something that was easy and cheap to make, and we can create a lot of content out of it. And that's kind of the exploration part of it. And here's kind of like what the combat would be, you know, like a character shows up, maybe like a Pokemon, and then you go into like kind of battle mode, and you have your life bar or whatever, and all this slashing. I was interested in keeping it simple, so not having like a shield or anything that you're carrying, so everything is like basically touch control. And I mean, this is like incredibly crude, as you can see. This is no like, wow, this looks amazing. But that was not the point. The point was to like, hey guys, this is the idea, and this is how it sort of plays. And I see concept pitches or concept art as kind of like, I think good ideas just generate like better ideas. So if you kind of have like a seed, and then hopefully you end up with a full crop once you share it with the team, who are also very talented. And then so just some ideas on how to expand like kind of like magic systems and stuff like that. Like maybe you have to draw some pictographs or something that create a magic spell or something like this. Which, I mean, maybe it's complicated to do that kind of detection, but like anything goes at this stage. It's just like a cheap drawing right now. I remember being very nervous about sharing this with the team, because I had spent like some weeks thinking about it, and like a week or two making it. And it's like a Sunday midnight deciding whether to send it or not to the founders of the team, because I know it, like at this point this is completely outside of the wheelhouse of what we've been doing as a studio, like just from Guacamelee, just switching to something completely bizarre with like a very dark atmosphere, like a sword fighting game. We've never done a full touchscreen game, so it was like kind of weird to be pitching this thing. And so for the first day I sent it, nobody kind of mentioned anything. And I'm like, okay, maybe they didn't see it or whatever. The second day, like Tuesday, nothing. Hey, guys, did you see the email? It's like, yeah, we saw it. Oh, okay, cool. And then like a week later, like, okay, I think we're gonna, we like it. We're gonna do a prototype with a bunch of other ideas that we're doing. Basically, this is the pitch, and like this is just like some mood kind of sort of storytelling thing. I mean, coming back to the Cursed Warrior kind of idea that kind of started it all. So this was the pitch for me, like having a single-player touch-based experience with really easy to make backgrounds, just like flat art. I mean, it's just short, make it arcadey, you know, like it doesn't need to be graphically amazing. 6 to 8 production cycle, like very quick turnaround, or way quicker than what we've done before. Low detailed characters, continue with like a graphic theme. We don't even need to do main character because it's first person. Like we don't need to do all those animations and stuff. The combat, keeping it very simple, very light. And the storytelling will be very minimalistic and kind of like in the background, not in the foreground. So I mean, what could go wrong? It's like this whole thing looks so solid, but everything went wrong. So we did that prototype along with other ones. This is some animations that Ben Thomas did. He's animator at Drinkbox. And I was away during this prototype. We did like a 2-day jam at the studio, and I was away in Mexico for vacation, so I missed it. But they did a prototype. They reused the Samurai Jack backgrounds for the internal game jam, which I thought was cool. So let's go through all these points. Single-player touch-based experience. So to put that in context, we're also doing Super Turbo Championship Edition. So we're prototyping this stuff at the same time we're doing like Guacamelee DLC and porting and doing the sort of Guacamelee 1.5 at that time. And Guacamelee was a pretty straightforward formula. Like everybody got it. It's like Metroidvania with like melee combat to the power of Mexico, and then that's basically Guacamelee. But when trying to define this like single-player touch-based experience, it's like, well, what is this experience? Is it action? Is it adventure? How much is it? How much, you know, like Zelda has puzzles. Are we doing puzzles? We're looking at things like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, because we like that combat, the rhythm, like waiting for weak points and stuff like that. We're looking at the awesome art for like Yearwalk and things like that, where like the storytelling is very moody, although that doesn't have combat at all. It's just like a puzzle game. We didn't want to do like a Mexican game this time. It was just too much pressure to keep going with all that stuff. And something like Myst, I thought was an atmosphere that was very interesting. But also elements of Zelda, but also like it's not top-down. This game is, so, you know, touchscreen for Ninja, but it's like, oh, for Ninja, yeah, of course. It's like, it's not that gameplay, but there's something there. It feels good to just like cut fruit, right? And Infinity Blade, of course, except Infinity Blade has a dodging mechanic and it's third person, and the graphics are fantastic, and you don't explore too much, and you don't fight more than one enemy. So it's not really a template that we can fit our game into. So that was incredibly tough to do, because everybody kind of took their experience of this is what an experience means, or this is what touch-based means, or action-adventure mean. And we were not kind of in the same page, so it was hard to find exactly the genre. So single-player touch-based experience was a very difficult thing that we didn't think it was going to be difficult, and we kept coming back to that problem to try to finesse it. It turns out we were doing a dungeon crawler, but we found that out like a year into production. The easy to make backgrounds, okay, well, like at least we can do this. Like we can finesse what the game is, but the background production should be pretty straightforward. This is some early navigation concepts. So basically the idea is to have like a scroll, kind of like a Flintstones background that keeps looping around. And that's basically divided in quadrants, right? So the tower is like north, east, south, the cave, and west, the other passage or something, and then cross dissolve between them. These are just some kind of early explorations on style and things like that. I kind of like the brushy kind of texture part of it, which we actually couldn't do because it was very expensive to do sprites for our engine. So we had to go back to do something more like Guacamelee, where it's like graphics and gradients and just verts. These are just like kind of all over the place because it's still we're figuring things out still. So you can see like it kind of we're going to have NPCs. Do you know how much of an adventure part of it? We're going to have towns. What's going to be like? But I drew this image, and here's where I feel like for me kind of started to turn around, because just like struck a chord or something was here that was very interesting. So this was kind of like the beginning of like kind of that, going in that direction. At the same time, we're figuring out how to do the concepts of the rotation and combat. So here's like a quick battle mock-up. You fight, but then you turn. Maybe you go to the cave. Maybe you keep walking. We keep going around. This is all not in engine. This is just like a quick animation I did in Flash, and it has some parallax in the background, which is weird because when you rotate, there's no parallaxing, but it looked cooler with it. So And doing something like year walk, where when you move forward, then more stuff shows up. These are some, I'm just gonna go quickly over this. These are some other tests, but something that was very difficult is determine arbitrarily how much is moving forward, how much is like a unit of moving forward. Is it like a soccer field? Is it like 2 steps? Is it like, you know, how many steps forward are you doing? And that was kind of like this test with this house in the right. And on the left is kind of like an early kind of dungeon kind of idea. And this is, again, this is all like stuff that as we're getting the tech ready, we're figuring out what are the rules of this world for the navigation, because it's not as easy as just doing the scrolls. It has to, there's a lot of rules, like how big are the doorways, how far can you see things, that kind of thing. In open areas, you cannot do diagonal, so limiting it to like the cardinal directions, things like that that we didn't think before starting. It didn't work at all. It was terrible. Like, you don't feel like you're rotating, you just feel like you're moving side to side, and that was not a good thing for a game that you needed that 360 kind of look. So one solution was hotel virtual tours, which is basically a panorama. Basically, it's like a cylinder with flat images on it. So Google Maps kind of uses this also. So if you ever seen like a panoramic picture app, this is what they do. It's basically a mesh that is a cylinder around you in 3D, and you're stitching together pictures that are 2D. So when you move around, then the mesh deforms. That deforms the image. So I'll show you in a minute how it looks. But basically, this is my crappy diagram drawing. Because we needed one cylinder, of course, for the first layer, but you also want to have that depth, so that meant having to do a second layer and a third layer. So it's 3 cylinders in our engine where we're mapping this to the art. This is a test that Steph Goulet, the art director, did. If I can play it, yeah. He did this in 3D Max really quickly and has like the cardinal points. Just so the rotation, but you see like the ground layers has 3 different colors. So like now you're in layer 3 now and that kind of thing. How would that work? It's obvious that it was really hard to figure that stuff out, given like this test doesn't look as good as what it ended up looking at. But that was like trial and error with it, with this thing, and we started to like be very concerned about being able to pull this off, because it looked so simple, but it was not. It didn't scale that way at all. At the same time, I'm doing more exploration on the style, so it's just like some palette cleanser images before it gets too technical. Again, exploring kind of mood and that kind of thing. Now, like the ground, like the layering is visible there. So this is what we ended up attempting as a first test. So for the outdoors, it's okay if the cylinders are just kept like that because the forest is organic, it's fine. But the indoors, we didn't want just to be in circular rooms. So we did this thing where when you map things to a cylinder, it deforms it. So if you have a normal plane, it just like naturally deforms. So if we pinch the art, when it deforms it, it makes it feel like there's a corner there. So this is final art from the game. And each of those kind of bubbles, that's like a cardinal direction in our game. And this is what mapping it to those cylinders looks like as you're navigating now in the game. So eventually we had to do, I mean, this is very polished. We didn't figure this out at that time, but it was kind of refining that process to the point where it feels like you're in a 3D space, but you're not. You're just in a cylinder. The camera moves a little bit, and then you're just teleported to the next node. So this is kind of like what Google Maps does. It just cross dissolves between them. And it just works for some reason. Like it ended up being not distracting when you're playing. You just accept that that's how the world happens. So easy to make backgrounds. It's super simple. All you need to do is 2D art of an interior, distort it with some action or script in Illustrator, map it to a cylinder in our engine, and you just make sure to not tilt the camera up or down because there's no art there, and you need 3 of those layers. So no. It was not simple at all. And at this time, I should mention, like, pre-production, getting all this stuff ready already had taken like 4 to 6 months informally because we're doing some Guacamele stuff. But that like short turnaround game was also not going to happen. And at this point, this is like a year after the pitch. And we made this like concept video. We wanted to do an announced trailer, but we didn't have the tech running yet or anything to show for after all this work. So we decided to animate, kind of like have like a target of what the game would look like. So I'll show you real quick a portion of this concept video. Also, the music is by the amazing Yamantaka Sonic Titan, who signed up to do the music, the soundtrack for the game, and they did an amazing job. So this was animated by Ben and myself, also using Flash, and some of the concepts are shown there. A lot of this stuff we don't know how to do. Like, all this stuff is just like, this would be cool to do, but we don't have the game structure yet. So this is just like conceptual things at that moment. And introducing some NPCs and characters that kind of made it up. Some of these were reused from the earlier tests that I had made. But somehow it starts to, these ideas are starting to generate more ideas and getting the team excited to make this. So I'll just let it play a little bit. So yeah, the idea was just create kind of like a crazy visual kind of dump on this and see how much we could try to do for the game. So that's like we're in the timeline. This is where we're at, right? So we decided to do like a vertical slice, a demo at that point. These are just some rough storyboards for kind of the first dungeon of the game. And this is just like some concept art. I kind of like, I wanted the dungeons to not be monotonous or just be brick walls. Definitely wanted like a moody, kind of dark, kind of aesthetic. But also combined with, on the left, there's like kind of, maybe you reach kind of like an internal garden or something like that, with some stuff that looks kind of like there was a culture there or something, and maybe something off-putting or creepy, like those plants that look like eyes. We're starting to do concepts that now are tied to game areas. So this is like another quick test just to see how much we can reuse. Now we have established some stuff, like how much it's going to be foggy in the background. We're going to just have 3 layers deep that you can look into. And obviously the outdoors, we'll just make it as though they're giant walls so that it's clear the direction, the cardinal directions are clear. So there's some concepts of the house at the beginning of the game. This is kind of taken with that first image that I showed you guys. That was that struck a chord with me. That was kind of like the reinterpretation of what it would look like in the game. Some exploration on forest and palettes. It was very quick, just reusing things. How can we block doorways? How can we make the dungeon not look the same if there's just like doors and nodes like that. So finding some variety, maybe with vegetation, maybe with what you see through the doors. Excuse me. So I want to jump a little bit to the characters, because some stuff in the characters, there's not a lot of it's not like Guacamole, it's not like a parade of NPCs in the game, but there's like a bunch of characters. It's some sketches of our main character, Sasha. She's this warrior that's in search of her family. And at the beginning, I thought she'd be like in her 20s or 20-year-old or something like that. But as we're developing the game, we realized we're doing a rites of passage kind of story. So then the design shifted to be more of a teenager, just so that it feels like she doesn't understand the world yet completely. She doesn't have that maturity yet. And I wanted to make her kind of racially ambiguous. We're like kind of like a mixed heritage or something. Like, we're doing a fantasy game, but I didn't want to be tied to doing something that's inspired in Nordic mythology or something like that. That's kind of like the established thing. So we could make anything, and even the language is gibberish, and people think it's Spanish for some reason or something. So wanted kind of like an exotic kind of look for the family and for Sasha. But I really want to talk about the enemies, and at this point we have 4 enemies. At this point in the timeline, not in the game. We started doing 4 enemies, and those took a long time. The iterations, it was slow, it was not working. So then we made some adjustments, and we decided to prototype 1 enemy per week. So we had 2 months to make 8 enemies, and that's like a lot of work. But I want to show you because this is, I think, the most fun I had during the process. So I'm going to go over quickly, but I can talk about this after. Basically, everything starts with like an idea. So Graham, or in this case, David Rusak. Graham is a producer. He's one of the founders. And David, he wears multiple hats, but he was in charge of doing the design of the enemies, the paper design. So we had this giant Google Doc, and he would write some ideas. And in this case, I'm just going to go over one of the enemies. It was called Demighost at the beginning. And the idea was to have an enemy that would split apart and maybe attack you in a flurry. Because when you're prototyping these enemies, they need to work in tandem, because you're not fighting one-on-one like a boxing match. You have to fight one, and then another one appears, and now they need to work sort of together so that it's fun for the player. So the behaviors needed to be different so that you're not just like spamming, dragging your finger around like crazy. There's like some strategy to it. So in this case, this was an enemy that the more you engage with it, the more you attack it, the faster, the more aggressive it becomes. So when Wednesday comes, David writes a proposal. Then on Thursday, we meet. I go over it. I selected some visuals from like the giant pool of different sketches that Ben and myself had made for like a year and a half. And in this case, Ben had this cool like ghost guy made of ghosts. Because we didn't want to have like just like guys with axes or zombies or something like that. Like, you could do anything at this point, so why not a ghost made of ghosts? So it would disband maybe, and I don't know. This was just like one visual idea. Another, and I just throw like 3 different ideas to the team. So the second one was another of Ben's sketches. This guy with like multiple mouths and multiple wings. And I thought that was cool. So maybe they're actually different. Like when they dodge, they actually disband, and then they individually attack, and then they kind of mush together and recombine into one. And the third one is kind of more like, okay, it was more like a ghost or a blob or something. You slash it, maybe has a normal attack, but at the bottom maybe has a heavier attack where like it summons this statue back into life and then attacks you like that. So then that's Thursday. Friday, we meet Alex, who's doing the programming, who would do this really amazing flow charts of the enemies. Basically, this is the behavior of that enemy. You have the idle stage, a timer to the attack, and then if unparried, then it repeats. If parried, this happens. And it's kind of like a nice kind of portrait of our enemies in this just scribbly pages. So we decide what the behavior is. We like sort of certain things about some enemies or the aesthetics, and then we decide. So then that Friday, I go back to the desk and I kind of clean up. In this case, we realized we needed, we liked the guy with wings. So we realized we needed kind of like a distinction when like it's aggressive and when it's not aggressive. Some animation notes for Ben, like when they recombine, like we don't want to make the animation completely expensive, so maybe just make it like that, and then there's combine already. And the severed pose. So in this game, you chop the enemy parts, and that's kind of like your currency in the game. So we needed that variety. So we chose a guy with wings because nothing else is dropping wings at that time, and we wanted kind of that variety. So that would be cool. Then Ben goes on and starts to rig up the animation file and start to talk to Alex about prototyping the enemy. And in the meantime, I do like kind of like a finished, polished pass of what the enemy would look like. In this case, I chose blue because none of the enemies at this point were blue, and we wanted something colorful. The wing is how this enemy attacks, so change the wings from a feathery look to more like a razor sharp kind of look. And it was important that it was not floating around, but like the wings are actually having like to carry this body. So this is what the animation looks like in our file. Like we've switched to Toon Boom at that point, and this is Ben's animation on the attack, one of the attacks. This has been iterated and is polished, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. And this animation polish happened later, but on Monday and Tuesday of the next week, we review the enemy as it's being prototyped, as Alex has time to program it, and Ben has the first pass of the enemy. And then Ben polishes up until Thursday, because on Friday, we already started the next cycle on Wednesday. So I'm going to show you what this guy looks like in game. And this is like actual like game footage. So the attacks are there. We changed it. We had to do kind of like a state where it's like catching his breath. And then if it gets too aggressive, then it splits up, and now you need to kind of manage the different attacks from different directions to kind of use the screen a bit more. And then severing, and then you collect your wings. So for this, the interesting thing is that this is just one enemy in this arena, but there could be multiple ones, so it makes it more dynamic and more difficult as the game keeps evolving. So low detail characters, yes, I would say they're graphic and simple looking, but I wouldn't say low detail, because a lot of the detail in these characters comes from their behavior and the iteration and how they need to convey the information for the player. Because it's a very intuitive game, we wanted to make it extra clear where the attack is coming from, not like you feel it's unfair because you've died against this guy like 5 times. You need to kind of learn from that. And that's like a lot of work for the animation team to convey that as an enemy is attacking you from the front in a 2D game. And this also piggybacks on the simple combat using touchscreen, because yes, the combat is simple and intuitive for the user, but not for us making it. To make it look seamless and simple is like a lot of work that goes in there. And combat is the main focus in the game, so that's something we cannot skimp on. We cannot like just Yeah, I mean, there's other things in the game. There's like exploration and characters and stuff like that in the storyline. But the combat is the main thing. So we really need to make sure we prioritize that and make sure the combat was very deep. And so for minimalistic storytelling, originally I didn't want any dialogue in the game, but we're not Journey and we couldn't do it. It was so hard. So you can like spend like 2 months trying to do a tutorial with just pantomime, or you can just like, okay, fine, let's do a text box. So we went with the text box. But I do think we succeeded in doing like a minimalistic story for the game. It's kind of like it's in the back. It's kind of it's very moody, and it's not too direct. But that makes the player more engaged in a way to try to discover the meaning of some things without having to handhold them through the storyline. So I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't want to spoil anything. But I'll show you real quick. This is at the beginning of the game. This is the tutorial I was mentioning. This is the mother character. And just like trying to convey, I mean, yeah, you're conveying the rules of the game at this point, but also it was important for the characters to feel like characters. And this is kind of like a glimpse at the relationship that Sasha has with her mom. And it's just in like the small choices in the animation and the posing, because it's basically 2 poses, but it's important to convey things through the character design and through this choice of poses. That was very hard to do, so I'm crossing it because it was really really hard. Like minimalistic stuff is or narrative stuff. It's always super complicated. So, to recap, how am I doing with time? To recap, the single-player touch-based experience, yes, what you need to do is define it, because this was a problem that was constant for us. Like just putting everybody in the same page was incredibly difficult. So we discovered we were making a dungeon crawler, like that was the closest genre, but that came after like a lot of trial and error and like looking at games that they don't fit that genre. And sometimes like when you say like, oh, let's make this game, an X game, like a Metroidvania or like a fighting game, there's like a stigma to those genres because like other mediums have more like, you know, genres that are more emotionally based instead of mechanically based. So sometimes there's like, I didn't want to jump into doing that, right? Like I just want to make a game that's fun and interesting and engaging. But by not having that label, that made it a bit difficult. So in a way, it's counterintuitive. You kind of sometimes have to start with something that's pre-established because that will make it easier. So for the easy to make backgrounds, I mean, if you're mapping 2D art to a cylinder and all that stuff, you're not making it easy on yourself. It does look way cooler than any of the initial concepts. But it blew up the project. It was not a 6 to 8 month project. It just became this giant game that we still thought in our minds that was like a small game. So when that happens, I mean, the solution is like, it could be like scaled down. Like, okay, let's go back to this arcadey Flintstones game. Maybe it doesn't look as good, but at least we can finish in time. Or, okay, let's just keep going with this scaled up version and make sure you make kind of like the psychological change to make, okay, we're not doing a 6 month game, we're doing a 2-year game. So that's also adapting from what I just said. Like, there's an initial plan and sometimes you're like very worried to deviate from that plan. But timelines are very difficult in this industry, and things change, and you discover new things about the game and what you want to do. So you do need to make some judgment calls and make sure everybody's on board with that. And adaptation is very important. For the characters, I would say yes. You need to identify what's the center of your game. For us, it was the characters, so we definitely spend a lot of time and detail with those because that's what's going to make the game good. And that allows you to not spend a lot of time worrying about some more irrelevant things, but when you're trying to do everything, you're not going to accomplish much. The biggest thing, though, was maybe it won't be a huge revelation for you guys because you're smarter than me, but simple does not equal simple to do. So a lot of this thing was like, it was simple because it's just simple to explain, but to execute like very subtle combat or story or something like that, there was a lot of care and a lot of things that it simply was not, it was not simple to make. And this is storytelling, there's not such thing. Like, you still need to do the whole iceberg, you know. And then if you want to choose to show only the top 10%, that's cool. But you still need to build the whole thing. And in a way, you know, less is more. Like, it is more work. Simple in storytelling, it doesn't happen. It's just be constantly iteration and headaches. So don't think because you have less things to show in your story that's going to make it simpler, especially in a game where like it depends on the mood and the storytelling of our character. Because in a way, you need to be more careful because you're not showing everything. So you really need to show only the specific, the good things. And that means there's a lot of work in just taking out all the excess stuff. But you don't need to listen to all I've said because I think mistakes are actually okay. I think learning from experience is so valuable. And I think people sometimes dismiss that as failure or something like that. But the mistakes we made here were crucial for us to improve the game and to improve ourselves as developers. If someone asked me if I would go back and try to do the whole thing knowing what mistakes I was going to face and the tough parts that I was going to face, I don't know if I would like take that chance if I didn't, if that meant I didn't get to experience the failure of that. If I was told to go back, knowing what I know now, knowing all these failures and mistakes, then yeah, of course, you know, jump back in that DeLorean and fix things, make sure like this is the priority, this is what's going to happen, definitely. But you want that experience. You want to go and try it and fail and try it again and fail and try it again. If someone just gives you the answers to the test, sometimes it's not actually useful at all. So I encourage you to just like don't listen to me and just do your own thing. And that's it. I have the trailer here. Just real quick, just to get like some perspective, because I haven't shown much of the game, because it hasn't come out, so put you in context a little bit. I don't know if we have time for questions, or if anybody has any questions. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for taking that, taking that challenge and doing it. You probably just allowed me to win a bet. I've been talking to a few technical guys. I'm a 2D artist and been wanting to try something out like that, and they said it couldn't be done. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Real quick though, about your ring setup.
Yeah.
When they move forward, is the ring moving into them, or are they moving into the next ring? Does that past ring?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. So the question is if with that 3 ring, you're welcome. The 3 ring setup, what's actually happening with the camera? So the camera is moving forward in Z, like it's actually moving. Our engine is actually it's 3D. It houses that cylinder. But when you move away from that cylinder, it starts to deform and it starts to break. But at that time, that's where the cross dissolve happens. So basically, yes, the cylinder is deforming and the layers in the back stop matching perfectly. But then you cross dissolve and then they don't match perfectly, and then you get to the center fit. And your brain just kind of like fills in the rest, and it's like, oh, it's fine, I just move forward. Yeah.
Hello. First of all, thank you, Augusto, for making Guacamele and Sever with your team. It's to me, it's a really great experience to see this kind of games that's being released. And my question here is, I know this is not based on Mexican culture, but to me, it still feels really similar to some things you did for Guacamele. Like, I still see the monsters as some sort of alebrije. It has a little bit of influence, and that's great because you are representing your culture. I mean, it's almost impossible to distance yourself from that, right? Exactly. And so my question here is, are you guys planning to continue doing things like that, pushing different cultures into games, and maybe making things like a fantasy, man? Because fantasy is just often dwarves, elves, and things like that. I mean, there's so many mythologies that could be explored, and the games industry seems to be a little bit fixated on those archetypes, So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I love all that stuff too. Like, Tolkien, that's great. It's just kind of think we want to sort of stand out. It's like we're a small team. We really need to make it look different. So yeah, and whenever you, so like this is talking about like adding the cultural aspects of making like a fantasy game, and how, it's hard to distance myself from the Mexico stuff because I just like it, so I'm just gonna do it. It's not like somebody forced me to do the Guacamele stuff. But yeah, as soon as you add color to monsters, then you get alebrijes, because that's what they are, and they're very unique. And we didn't want to shy away from the color. In a way, having a very colorful game with like such gruesome themes, like you're chopping enemies apart. So if you make it very dark and moody, then it starts to feel very weird. You start to feel off. So we wanted that balance where like it's still a game, it's still abstracted. You still feel a bit uneasy, but you don't feel it's not a gory game because of the graphics are stylized and the colors are very vibrant. So that kind of compensates that and makes this weird, really weird. Like that dissonance is what makes it interesting for us. Okay.
Awesome talk. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
I'm just curious, as a gameplay systems designer, super fascinating for me to see somebody approach making a game starting with art and theme and mood and emotion, and then gameplay systems being figured out later. Was Guacamele the same?
No, Guacamele was, every game is different. For us, it's not like, for this one, it started with that. For Guacamele, it was more like, what about doing a game in Mexico, and just like the visual stuff. and there was like a bunch of ideas that fit really well with that. But like the dimension idea for Guacamele and like the idea of melee moves as platforming, that was sort of a separate idea, and it just kind of magically merged seamlessly. Yeah.
Kudos to you. Magical game.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys for coming, and enjoy the rest of the GC. Thank you.